576. Faith is the victory. All right. All right, Matthew, the 19th chapter in our Bible class. I think we finished the discussion of the rich young ruler. And we'll actually begin with the very last verse of Matthew chapter 19 and move into chapter 20. So in the book, we're kind of on lesson 18 and question 11. So somebody read Matthew 19, verse 30 through chapter 20, verse 16. Okay, so this is a very unique parable. Seems to be unique to me and introduces some interesting concepts that we'll talk about as we look at this. First of all, the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. So he goes out and he finds some people to work in his vineyard. This is the start of the day. There's going to be 12 hours of work. You know, we might complain about an 8-hour day, or if you have to work overtime or something like that. So basically, they're working from about as early as you can start working to the end of the day. There's not much light left and when they get through working, and they're going to work through the heat of the day in the vineyard. So then he goes out about noon and hires more. And then he goes out late in the day and hires more still. So if you think about an 11-hour day, maybe if you started at 7 o'clock, that gives you 5 till lunchtime, and you don't get an hour for lunch, you know. I'm sure they got some time to eat, but you get back to work. That's still... You're working 12 hours, and then you work till about 6 or 7 o'clock that night. That gives you your 12 hours. That's a long day, isn't it? And that's hard work. And in ancient times, they didn't have a lot of the, they didn't have OSHA. They didn't have a lot of these safety rules. They didn't have a lot of the limitations on child labor and things like that. When you were young, you had to work. You were not expected to work as much as an adult or produce as much as an adult, but you had to work. And so the lesson in this comes at the time that they receive their wages, right? So when pay time came, question 12 says, what seemed unfair to some of the workers?
That the ones who worked an hour may be the same as the ones who worked all day.
Yeah. That just didn't seem fair to them. So that's, I think, to me, the most important lesson or concept that we get from this parable is an understanding of the proper place of fairness. You know, when we get out the Monopoly set and we set all the pieces in order or whatever, you know, kind of games, you know, whatever, and there are rules that we play by, right? And everybody has to agree to those rules. Sometimes there's what are called house rules, where you alter something about the play, but everybody agrees to it, and everybody has to keep those rules. That's fair, right? Everybody has the same opportunity and potential at the start of the game. That's fairness. To that degree, God is fair, okay? Because everybody has a chance. Now, some people don't take advantage of that chance. Maybe they live for themselves for a time. Maybe they live most of their life. Maybe they live almost all of their life for themselves. And they obey at the 11th hour. They're just going to, okay, let's just kind of compare it. So a guy is 87 years old, and he realizes one day, I'm going to die soon. I need to get my life right. So he goes to church and he walks up at the invitation song. I'm just going by, I know that a lot of that's invitation tradition and custom, but that's okay. He walks up during the invitation song. He is baptized into Christ for the remission of his sins. All of his sins are taken away. He dies 3 days later. He was never persecuted for the cause of Christ. He was never fired from a job because of his faith or anything like that. He probably didn't do a lot of visiting. 3 days. I mean, just 3 days. And he's going to get to waltz into heaven with everybody else. This is the thing that I've thought about a lot of times. Because we don't live in a day and age in which there is great persecution. So if I live out my life in, I know our culture is kind of going crazy in some ways, but if it holds together long enough for me to get out of this world, you know, and I've led a peaceful life, never fought in any wars, never suffered for the cause of Christ, and I've been relatively blessed with a strong body most of my life to be able to do the things I wanted to do, haven't had terrible diseases and things like that. So when I get to heaven and I sit down beside Paul, who said, I bear on my body the scars of Jesus Christ. He calls them the marks of Jesus Christ. He's talking about scars. And those disciples who were beheaded for the cause of Christ. And those disciples who were put in the gladiator games to be eaten or killed by lions or beasts. What am I going to say to those?
Along those same lines, as you were saying, the grace of God and the ability for God to love us so much that he gave his only begotten Son. Just as though when he was on the cross getting crucified, and at the last hour, the criminal who was with him, Christ told him, you get to be home with me in heaven. So this guy lived his whole life, did whatever he wanted to do, earned the right to be on that cross because of his guilt.
Yep.
But because of the love of God and the grace of God and the all-knowing knowledge of God, we can have examples like that it's never too late to start.
That's right.
serving the Lord.
And that is a really important point. It is never too late. And there's a lot of people, I meet people all the time who will just look at me and tell me it's too late for me. I've lived a very selfish life, and I just can't, the problem is they just can't believe God can forgive them.
Wow.
after they have lived the kind of life they've lived. It's too late for me. And I know that we struggle to understand why somebody would think that way, but I understand how somebody would feel that way. Okay? So we understand how God's grace works and what the Bible has taught about the plan of salvation and how God intends to save us. So we think, why would a person not try? But some people have just lost hope. They don't feel worthy. Of course, that's really not a good argument because I don't feel worthy either. So there's a lot of concepts that we could touch on in this. I saw Arnold's hand and then Buddy's.
Yeah, the Bible tells all of us to work out our own salvation.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the last minute, if you obeyed and, you have been baptized,
Mm-hmm.
then, if you've done what Christ asked you to do, then, you're working out your own salvation. So we can't say, well, he didn't do it soon enough, or, he waited this time to be saved, so it's an individual, thing.
And if you work out your own salvation, you do it according to God's plan, which leaves room for someone who comes at the 11th hour to be paid in glory, the same as someone who obeyed when they were very young. That's God's plan.
And that's the power of the blood of Christ.
Oh, yes, yes. Here's the neat thing about the blood of Christ. It is so powerful that whatever God plans, whatever God's plan requires, Jesus' blood is sufficient to pay for. And so if all the people of all time came to God, the blood of Christ would be powerful enough to forgive all the sins of all people.
Amen.
And that's how powerful it is. Buddy?
I guess it's the same point Arnold was making. The way I see this parable is that my salvation is between me and God. And I don't have anything to do with someone else's salvation. I don't have to worry about
Yeah.
it. That's not my concern to the point of it affecting my salvation in any way. So, to your point or your illustration of, when we get to heaven and I feel like those Christians that have truly suffered real persecution, they're not looking at us as, well, y'all took the shortcut. It's, man, I'm glad you're here too.
And we're going to talk about that in just a few moments, but let's just, this business of comparing ourselves with other people is wrong. It's sinful. It will lead to misery, first of all, because I can always find somebody who's better than I can. And even though I might find a lot of people who are worse off than I am, or less than I am, if you want to use that expression, people say, you think you're so wonderful. Well, when you follow God's will, it is wonderful. But God gets the glory for that, not you or me. But the point is, we will poison ourselves by comparing ourselves to other people in any capacity. Who are we supposed to compare ourselves to? Jesus Christ. And not, well, okay, first of all, we compare ourselves with Christ to realize our condemnation. He is perfect and we are not. I mean, we are so far from perfect. Though we're not content with that, we would want to do better. But we realize, and honesty forces us to confess, that we are not perfect. But looking to Jesus is not just essential for understanding my condemnation, but for understanding my salvation. Because the same one who demonstrates how much I need to change provides the way for me to change. Through his blood, the very one who condemns me by his perfect life saves me by his sacrificial blood. You see, Jesus had to be perfect because, the lamb sacrificed in the Old Testament was without spot, without blemish. It was not lame. It was not blind. It was not sickly like the ones that they offered in Malachi. It was as perfect as a lamb could be. Jesus was perfect so that he might be the perfect sacrifice for me. He's not perfect just so he could gloat over me and make me feel bad. That's not the purpose of Jesus living a perfect life. It was so that he might be the right sacrifice for me so that I can be saved. And Jesus in no way wants me to feel bad when I look to him. I don't look to him, frankly, I don't look to Jesus for condemnation. I've figured that out all by myself. I didn't need his perfection to reflect upon me, to know that I am at times have been ashamed and I have sinned. And so the perfection of Jesus, I look to him because I want to be like him, because he provides me the way and the means to be like him. And that's why I look to Jesus. And it doesn't matter how what stage in life I obey. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, but let me pause and let Sam and then Gretchen talk.
There are several schools of thought where some people will say, well, when we get to heaven, those who have been really, really good Christians are going to get the bigger mansions, the better spot. And we don't see that really talked about anywhere in the Bible. So they're getting it from other sources. But you can look at passages like this that clearly refute that idea.
Yeah.
God does not play favorites among the faithful. Paul, Peter are just going to be just as good as the Christian who's struggling, but he makes it in the end. When you look at the parable of the talents, the servant that comes back with 5 talents and the servant that comes back with 2 talents receive the same praise. Even though 5 is not equal to 2, their outcomes were not exactly the same. They did not produce as quite the same result. But the fact that they both acted in faith and were faithful in their duty and their work was equal. If we are doing that, then whatever stage or however qualified we may be, skillful, is not really the issue. So when people, and you see other denominations that have hierarchies of people who are able to do or qualified or have some sort of higher echelon of Christianity, if you will, you don't see that anywhere in Scripture.
That's right. And I would say, too, that also speaks to the fact that there will not be 7 dimensions, or what were the 7 levels? Yeah, levels is the word. 7 levels to hell. There's not. Hell is hell. Heaven is heaven. The glory will be shared, and the misery will be shared. And here's something that is frightening to think about. Okay, so if the one who works at the last, but he does what God has commanded, is saved just like the one who worked from early age, okay? In the same way, the one who almost makes it to heaven but doesn't receives the same condemnation as one who profaned God's name all of his life. That's a frightening. That's a frightening thing. The lukewarm people too. All people in the middle, people. Doesn't matter whether you are on the spectrum. Gretchen, let me get your comment now.
Well, it's really outside the box, but I have to say that for those of us who have been baptized, received the gift of the Holy Spirit, and we live with this, we feel more blessed throughout that time. And the man that was partying, doing his things, getting in debt, going over here, sleeping with 17 women, whatever, he doesn't have the joy. I mean, there's no
That's
joy
right.
in that. And so at the same time, if you look to try to reflect it back onto the parable or the story, that the people that were standing there said, we would have worked. Nobody hired us.
Yes. Yeah.
That, in 10 hours or whatever they were standing there, and they weren't feeling good.
Yeah, it runs a little deeper, and I want to talk about that in just a minute, a little bit more in depth. That's a good point. Keep your finger here. We'll come back. Turn to James chapter 2. James chapter 2. And we'll learn something here really important about understanding how or what God expects and what condemns. Somebody read chapter 2 and verse 10.
For whoever shall keep the whole law and yet stumble on one point is guilty of all.
Okay. Now that's a passage that I've always thought was extremely revealing about the matter. It doesn't matter, the older brother in the story of the prodigal son, the older brother looked down upon his younger brother because he lost the money that was his inheritance, that he wasted that money with harlots, that I'm sure there's many other things that he did, and he felt like his younger brother was despicable. Now, the older brother had a problem. He had a problem of bitterness, of hatred. I believe he probably had a problem of wishing he had done what the younger brother did, or at least had some way that he could have some fun for himself. And even though he did stay within the lines, so to speak, he had this bitter heart all these years, and it erupted and caused him to speak to his father, probably in a way that's disrespectful, but certainly uncooperative. And so what you see is it doesn't matter whether you have a bunch of sins or if your sins are terribly egregious or if you've had them all your life. It doesn't matter. It's whether you have sin or not. Jesus' blood forgives all of our sins. So that's the issue, not how many sins. And so conversely, I talked earlier about, what am I going to say to these people in heaven who were beheaded for the cause of Christ, and I've never even been put in jail for the cause of Christ. What am I going to say? Just as it doesn't matter how many sins you've committed or not, as long as you came to Christ before your life ended and faithfully obeyed the gospel, in the same way, God's not counting up how much blood you spilt for the cause of Christ either. If you've got the kind of heart that the Bible commands, you have given it to God, you are trying to be a living sacrifice, setting an example, letting your light shine, coming together and worshiping Him every day, and when the saints assemble and trying to reach others with the gospel, then you will be just as faithful as the person who gave their life for the cause of Christ. And that's hard for us to square. We think that person who gave his life is so much more faithful. But here's the bottom line. He followed God in his generation, which led to persecution. If I follow God in my generation and circumstances are such that I'm not persecuted the same way, I'm still faithful to God, and that's what matters. That's what makes us saved or not if we're faithful to Him. And we do need to, be mindful of what that means. Now, Sam, you had your hand up. Let me get your comment.
If we're like that older brother in the story of the prodigal son, we're going to have very little motivation to help others find salvation. And this is something that is human nature. We always want what's fair. I've done more work than I should do.
Yes.
And that's only fair. But what we fail to recognize is if we had things perfectly fair, none of us would get
That's right.
salvation.
We'd have been destroyed a long time ago.
Let's
That's
think
right.
that we can earn our way somehow more than anyone else. If we have that in the back of our minds, then maybe that'll keep us a little bit more humble. Going back to Matthew chapter 20, verse 15, where it says the master speaking, he says, don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I'm generous? He didn't say generous to whom. I mean, you could assume like he was being very generous to the ones that came at the end, but was there not in essence a form of generosity in the ones he hired first also.
That's right.
They were able to receive a day's wage, and he could have chosen not to hire them, and then where would they be? So, you know, having kind of that in the back of our mind should really help with that attitude.
We should never be, and this is really important, because what Sam is pointing out is that when I am envious of another person, in a sense, I am, because God has allowed that person to accrue what prosperity he has. I am charging God in a sense, and maybe envious. I'm thinking of my envy toward him, but maybe, as Jesus says here, maybe it's toward God, because God has made a decision. Why does that man live on the mansion on the hill and I don't get to? Why is he driving a big, nice car and I'm driving this clunker that breaks down every month? Why does he have really nice clothes and everybody thinks he's... Have you ever noticed how wise they think you are when you got a lot of money? I mean, they interview you and ask you all kind of questions. People can memorize your favorite food and what your dog's name is and all these kind of things. If you're a celebrity, yeah, that's what they do. Is that fair? Of course it's not fair, because it's not a matter of whether or not it is fair. It is a matter of whether or not it is righteous. That is what God is trying to achieve, not absolute fairness. As Sam pointed out, we shouldn't even be thinking about fairness, because no matter what, even if God gave me all the goods in all the world, or conversely, if God didn't give me anything, fairness is not the issue. I don't deserve anything for the sins that I've committed, but God has offered his son. How can I quibble about my car when God has given me his son? How can I quibble about how many rooms my house in it? You can only sleep in one bed at a time. You can only drive in one car at a time. And I know it's no fun to be sitting on the side of the road broken down waiting for the wrecker to come. I know that there are things that are not enjoyable. But all of us, if we maintain our faithfulness to God, will maintain a heart of appreciation for what we've received. The older brother was not thankful. He still had all the things the father gave to him. Everything. He said, son, all I have is yours. I've already given you both your inheritance. Basically, the father's saying, I have nothing. And in the similar sense, God gave the best of heaven to us, his son. So whatever circumstances we live in, and I deal with brethren in a lot of different countries that are trying to get money and things like that. And it's amazing when they want to make friends because they're a preacher in another country, in a third world country. Just as quick as you accept their friendship on Facebook or something like that, they start saying, well, I've got a leaky roof. Can you send me $100? And it's really unfortunate. The fact of the matter, the truth of the matter is, I could change his life. Okay? I could give him $200-300 a month. I could probably squeeze that out and be fine. Okay? And that would change his life. But what would that do to him in his culture? He would all of a sudden he'd be getting all this money for some preacher in America. He starts getting puffed up. The brethren who don't have those kind of connections, and he's got a computer to talk with me on Facebook because brethren have helped him. Some church somewhere has helped to support him. And now he has a computer, which he wouldn't have. And he uses it and I'm sure some of the brethren send money over there. And I'm not being critical of any who do, but you have to be very careful. Money can ruin a lot of things. And we have to be careful not to let it poison our heart that that's what we want. We have Jesus. We have salvation. We should never not be happy. I know that's not bad. That's not good grammar, but still, we should never not be happy. Casey?
Making a vessel or destroying it and making absurdity of that which is created to question the motives, the purpose, the plan, the method of the Creator, that which creates. It's absolutely absurd. And Jeremiah points that out, and it's pointed out in other ways in Scripture, Matthew 20 being one of those. And I've always loved this passage because it has both a here, now, earthly application for us as Christians or employees, or in a spiritual application, which is really the more important. But the absolute absurdity of us or anyone calling into question the one who has the authority and whose vineyard it is and whose money it is and whose plan it is to call anything that they do into question.
And you know, this idea, and it's in Romans chapter 9, verses 20 and 21, this idea of God is the potter and I'm the lump of clay is what I am. Okay? So, we know that a lump of clay doesn't have a will. God has given us a will. A lump of clay doesn't have a choice. God has given us a choice. But the only way this is going to work out is I have to make myself like that lump of clay. I've got to be soft and moldable. On those circumstances where God molds me into the end result, I have to become firm and rigid and stand on solid ground. But I have to always continue to search for areas of my life that I need to be moldable and soft in God's hands. I don't want it to be hard for God to make me into what I should be, okay? He is infinitely more wisdom than I, more wise than I, okay? Therefore, whatever He chooses is best for me. Now, I want to talk before class is over about something that Gretchen said earlier. She touched on this idea that the person who obeys at the 11th hour, some people have the idea that he got his cake and ate it too. He just had such a, he got to go out there and have a big old time with the worldly people. Then he slides under the tag at home plate right at the end of his life, and he's saved from all his sins, and he goes to heaven. And that's the part that we don't think is fair. But here's the problem. It's this notion that living a worldly life is really the better thing to do. That's the problem. This notion that even Christians buy into. Because people of the world, and you think about a man who lives, he's slept with a bunch of women and whatever, and maybe he's a celebrity, maybe he's wealthy. He's got race cars, and he's had all these experiences that he can jet over to France to eat a meal and come home and all these kinds of things. And we look at that and we say, oh man, that looks so wonderful. Now, what's a guy like that going to be doing most of the time? Is he going to be frowning or smiling? He's going to be smiling because this is what the world has said should be your ultimate way to live. And he's living it. He's living the dream is what he says. And he's got to have a smile on his face. Now, I know there's a lot of people who grow into despair living this life. Because the truth of the matter is, it is an empty life. It is a life that you don't have anything to pay for your sins or your regrets. You hold them. You try to justify yourself. How do people with sin who don't turn to God, how do they try to justify their sins? What? Oh, by giving, by giving to charity and things like that. Yeah, okay. How else do they, in their own mind, justify their sins? I'm only human. That's right. I'm not perfect. You expect me to be perfect? And because you can't be perfect, you don't even try. That's really what happens. And I tell you another way they try to justify it is they say, everybody is like me. Everybody, I don't care the preacher. I don't care who it is, the person that looks like a faithful Christian. They've got all these skeletons in their closet, these secrets they are hiding. If the truth came out, everybody's like me. That's what they think. And they just cannot conceive of the fact that some person could be sincere and truly following God all the time from a true heart. They're not perfect. See, you can follow God with a true heart all the time and still fall into sin. And by all the time, I don't mean every single moment. I realize that there are moments when we fall, but they pick themselves up and they turn back to God and they go back to faithful service. And so the point I'm making is that even though you see a smile on his face, of course you're going to see a smile on the face. He thinks he's got a smile because he's got the tiger, life by the tail, so to speak. He's living the dream, so to speak. Of course he's going to smile. And he's not going to tell anybody how empty he is until he's ready to turn to something different. A lot of people will complain about their money and the problems that money brings, but they won't get rid of it. Do you know that there is a lottery support group for people who win the lottery, and they've got all this money now, and what happens is their friends won't hang around them unless they pay everything. And if they don't pay for everything, they just won the lottery. So they feel like, for a long time they'll pay for it. And then they start saying, wonder why he's coming. Is he really my friend, or is he here just because I'm paying for everything? Vacations and meals and all that kind of stuff. Why is he here? And I don't know. I think I'll just not pay for anything and see if he'll go away. And then it creates bitterness. So you see all these things that you have. So that these people who have these lotteries, they form this support group like Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's to support them in the troubles of having lots of money. Well, I'll tell you a real good way to solve that problem. If you've got a lot of money and money is the problem, you can give it away to people who need it. It's what you can do. And if you did that, then you wouldn't have all those problems with money. But they never do that. They hold on to it and complain. It's just really a funny thing about life. And what we need to recognize is that living the dream, as culture says that, having everything you want, does not lead to happiness day to day. True joy comes through giving. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Remember, the word blessed in the Bible could also be translated happy. It'll make you happier to give than to receive. As a kid, you don't see that way. But as an adult, if you continue to have that profane, worldly notion that it's better to get than to give, then you've never grown up. You're not going to be happy. You're going to be miserable. You may learn how to hide it. And all those sins, one other thing I want to say, I've got several hands up. Be patient with me. All those sins that you're committing scar the soul. They add to your regret. They turn you to bitterness. They poison your soul. They cause you to look at everybody in the world with suspicion because they're just like me and they're just hiding it better than I'm so honest, I admit my sins while I'm still doing it. Oh, they're confessing it, going to church, and that really, people are really bitter about hypocrites. You realize that to be a hypocrite is one of the worst things you could possibly be. It can do so much more harm to the cause of Christ than anything you can do as a worldly man or a worldly woman. But so the point I'm making in all this is that I want God, and I love this passage in Proverbs chapter 30 where he says, God, bless me with the things I need. Don't give me riches or I'll forget about you and profane your name. Don't give me poverty. Just give me the things I need. You choose the way. Remember David, God was going to punish him, and he said, choose your punishment. I won't go into all the details. And you know what David said? David said, I want to be in your hands. I don't want to be in the hands of other men. I want to be in your hands. And that's all we're saying. Keep yourself in God's hands, and whatever he decides about that is going to be okay. And the truth of the matter is, I've seen Christians in many parts of the world, visited them, lived, been around, spent enough time around them to see that faithful Christians are happy in every culture. They are. People who are thankful are happy in every culture. I don't care with the monetary scale and things they don't have that they'd probably like to have them. They think that they make life easier, but they're finding happiness with even eating rice and beans every day. But they're still happy. I had a big old steak today my wife fixed for me. I'm very blessed. I don't deserve that, but we can find happiness if we keep ourselves in God's hands. Now, Sam's and then James, and there may have been another one, but let's do those two first.
Just kind of another example of some of the stuff you were talking about earlier. The guy who founded the company that created the game Minecraft some years ago sold out to Microsoft for like $14 billion, some insane number. And, you know, once he got his payout, he bought a mansion in like Beverly Hills, moved out, got all the nice stuff. And he was interviewed some time ago after that, and, you know, they asked about how he was doing, and he said he was miserable.
Yeah.
Because he had everything he could have ever wanted, but he had no one to share it with, and he had no purpose to keep going. So, you know, who's the happy person then?
Yeah.
I've got a lot I can complain about my life, but that's not a complaint I have. And you know, purpose is one of those things that is so vital to a person's well-being and just mental wherewithal to keep going. And if anyone ever does that, look at modern philosophy or even ancient philosophy. People for years have been trying to figure out what's the meaning of life, even though that has been answered a long time ago in Ecclesiastes. If we can't find that, you're not going to feel happy or blessed in any way because you're not going to be fulfilled. You're not going to be satisfied. And, you know, it goes from there. So, lest we think that we are really in the worst situation, we've got Christ, we've got the hope of salvation.
And we have a purpose and a goal to live for, and that is obviously his image after him, to mold ourselves into that image. And so, yeah, good thoughts. James?
Yes, you had said that the person who lived the sinful life, all the fun, all the cars, that some people may think that he got away with it and he was having fun.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I can understand what you mean by that. But on the opposite side of it, or on the flip side of that coin, the real answer is that if you look at a Christian who doesn't have that and lives a Christian life, from the time he's born all the way faithfully through his entire life and runs the good race, all the way to the end, is much happier throughout his lifetime.
He doesn't have the regrets.
Then the person
Yeah.
who had all the sin, all the fun, all the cars, all the money, all the luxuries of this world, of this life, never wanted for anything, and lived that life, who may become miserable by having everything. But if you look at a Christian, a faithful Christian, who's been faithful all his life, all the way to the end, that person on the inside of his humanity is satisfied more often, happier with less, happier with what he has, would be happier with whatever God blesses him with,
That's
which
right.
is more, not asking for everything like you said in Proverbs 31, you said?
Proverbs 30.
30, but just having the things that
Just what he needs, that's
what
right.
is- That Christian is way more happier than the person who has everything because of the relationship that he has with God, the relationship that he has with other Christians. And I'm not saying that, maybe it's good to be a poor Christian or it's good not to be rich, but I am saying I would rather be a Christian than a rich man because of the joy
Sure.
that you can have from knowing the glory of God and understanding the grace of God instead of living this wild life which God does not like.
What does it profit if a man gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Jesus said. Brandon?
Yeah, so,
Yeah, go ahead and ring that bell while you're.
I can see why, going back to the story, I can see why the people that worked all day were upset with the people that came in. If I was to work 8-hour days and got see why I'd be upset. And I get the story, the point of, I signed my contract, I need to be happy with the contract that I signed. It's not my money to give. All the points that go into the story. And the attitude of those people, completely understand. But what is an extremely huge blessing is no matter where we are today, or even for those people that may not know God, all the way up to that last hour, if they know God in that last hour, they get that blessing. And that is amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so, whether we've been here our whole life, or that last person that had that last moment and was able to turn to God, they have the grace of God. That's amazing.
Yes.
So
Yeah, it's just as amazing.
it absolutely is.
That's right. That's right. And so you think about this idea, we need to recognize the fact that the person who comes to God at the very last carries a burden that maybe the Christian who has served God most of his life doesn't carry. Besides that, in that moment when we obey the gospel, in that moment when he obeys the gospel at the 11th hour, there is that same joy, that same relief, that same understanding. And that's why Jesus died on the cross. Not to make everything fair. It is a very human thing to think the way these people thought. Jesus is trying to change the way we think so that we don't look at the earthly conditions and make decisions about what would be great. That we look at the heavenly conditions, our relationship with God, and we thank him for that. Obviously, I've met a number of people who obeyed very late. They never had time to learn the scriptures. They never had time to learn many things. And it was heavy on their hearts. And I would try to encourage them because I knew they were saved. I knew they did everything the Bible commanded and were doing the best they could. They were making sacrifices. It was clear that they were sincere. And all we can do is encourage one another. That's why it's not right for us to look at another person and make decisions about whether or not that person should be doing more or not. I need to leave him up. In fact, Paul talks about this in Romans 14 when he talks about the stronger brother and the weaker brother. And don't look down on your weaker brother, he says, because God is able to make him stand, and God will make him stand in the last day. So we need to recognize that everything by God's will, by God's wisdom, what is best for me is what I need and what God has placed before me. I need to be thinking about the spiritual lessons, not the earthly conditions, every step of the way so that I can be faithful to God and his word. Lots of great thoughts. That's just a great story, great parable. The wisdom of God is seen in this as much as any of the parables that he told. All right, let's get our songbooks out.